Born and raised in New York City, Julie Bear began her career as a bookseller at Shakespeare and Company, where she discovered the joy of putting books into people's hands. Could not agree more, Julie. Her first job in publishing was at Sanford J. Greenberger Associates, and she started her own agency, Bear Literary, in 2004. Julie represents a variety of writers across a literary spectrum with a special emphasis in fiction. And Jane Pek was born in and grew up in Singapore. She holds a BA from Yale, a JD from the New York University School of Law, and an MFA in fiction from Brooklyn College. Jane's short fiction has appeared in the Brooklyn Review, Witness, Conjunctions, Lit Hub, and 2 times in the Best American Short Stories, which is no easy feat. Nice, Jane. She currently works as a lawyer at a global investment company, and one of her hobbies, I loved this part, I had to throw it in, is cycling around the city in search of superlative almond croissants. Her book, The Verifiers, introduces Claudia Lin, a sharp-witted amateur sleuth for the 21st century. This debut novel follows Claudia as she verifies people's online lives and lies for a dating detective agency in New York City until a client with an unusual request goes missing. The Verifiers made most anticipated lists from Lit Hub, The Nerd Daily, and Electric Lit. National Book Award winner Charles Yu called it smart, twisty fun, while Glass Hotel author Emily St. John Mandel said she loved it so much she didn't want it to end. And on that note, if you're not already raring to read The Verifiers, I'm sure you will be by the end of this conversation. So I'm going to let Julie and Jane, the Jays, get started, and I will be back later for Q&A. So have a great conversation, you two.
Thank you so much. Hi, Jane.
Hey, how are you? It's so like nice to see your face, even if it's on screen, I guess.
I know. I feel like the last time we saw each other was amazing because it was in person in a bookstore, but masked. So it was like, hello, Jane.
But you could still like recognize me immediately. I was super impressed.
Well, it was easy to recognize you too because you were up on the podium talking. Okay, I have so many things I want us to talk about because I love this book so much and I love Claudia so much. But I wondered if we could start even before we get to talking about the book and talk a little bit about your path to becoming an author, because I think you took a really interesting sort of circuitous route. And I wonder if you could just tell everyone a little bit about when you first realized you wanted to pursue a career in writing and sort of how that fit into the life you were living at the time.
So I think writing was something that like I always knew I wanted to do. Like I think even when I was a small kid, like I really enjoyed reading and writing, and my long-suffering parents bought me this book that I filled with like little stories that were like terribly illustrated because I cannot draw, and they had to pretend that it was good and stuff. And I think that was just something that I always kind of did as a teenager and then in college, and then I felt like I kind of reached my final year of college and I panicked about not having a life plan. So I was like, well, I'll apply to law school. And so I did, and I actually did really enjoy law. Like I enjoyed kind of the intellectual rigor and just kind of learning about cases and learning to think about the world in like a certain way. And then kind of after law school, I was fortunate enough to get a job at a big law firm. And so I kind of moved along that track and I became a mergers and acquisitions attorney, which is partially why there is a very overworked mergers and acquisitions attorney character.
I love this. You do this thing, and I don't know if you know that you do it, where you call it you use the term murders and acquisitions instead of mergers. Yes, because that's like a joke among people, right? Among law
people. The thing is, I actually didn't even know about that joke until I was actually at a writing workshop, at a house writing workshop, and someone said murders and executions, and I was like, what? But yeah, so I was kind of like going down that track, but I kind of always knew that I didn't want to make partner. And so I kind of knew that my time at a law firm had a bit of a kind of a natural time limit. And at the same time, I also did think that, if I continue on that track for too long, I would end up like 5 years later or something, just regretting that I had never really taken the time to pursue this thing that I had always known I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Even though at the same time, I mean, like it just feels to me like it's so much easier to be an attorney at a top law firm than it is to get a book published. And
Yes. Insane as that is. Yes.
and so I just felt like, I was kind of floundering in the wilderness, I think, with the writing thing. I was trying to write very, very slowly, like manage maybe one short story a year. I didn't have a community. I didn't really have writing peers. I didn't feel plugged into any larger kind of environment where I felt like I could just write and feel like I was doing something.
Yeah.
And so that was actually why I decided to try out the Tin House summer writing workshop. And that was just like, I mean, it like really blew my mind. It was just a really good experience. And just being around, I think for the first time, people who were all working on their own projects, who took writing really seriously.
Seriously. Yeah.
And you could just kind of walk up to anyone and be like, what are you working on? And they would, want to talk about it. And they would ask you what you were working on and everything. And so I think it was after that I began to seriously consider like, oh, maybe I do want to take time off to write, or I do want to pursue an MFA. And so I actually quit my job and I moved to Singapore for a year.
Did everybody freak out? Was everybody like, what are you doing quitting your job? Or was everybody like, go pursue your dreams?
So I think I did it kind of the lame way in that what I did was I took like a 3-month leave of absence that then became a 6-month leave of absence.
You're like, I'm not quitting.
Exactly.
I'm just taking a break.
Yes, and living, in my parents' house, trying to write.
I'm sure they love that.
Yeah, I know. They were like, what are you doing? I also dragged my then girlfriend to Singapore with me. So it was all in all, I mean, I'm glad it turned out well. But I think one thing that I did learn from my time in Singapore was that I think some people can do it, and like I'm really impressed that they can. But for me, it was just very isolating to be trying to work on something on my own, again with no community,
right,
and no sense that what I was doing was any good or would ever see the light of day.
Right.
And I think that is something that I've always struggled with all along with writing, especially because it's so solitary and it's so subjective. Yeah. And you can work on something for so long and it can just come to nothing at all.
Yeah.
And you have to be prepared for that. And I think so many successful writers talk about how they spent so long on their first book and then they never sold it. And
it's in a drawer somewhere. Right.
Exactly.
And it's so different from law, where I feel like there's so many clear, like, that's a kind of a job where it's like, you hit this milestone, you do this kind of work, you'll hit here, then you'll be on this partner track. And it's very, sort of black and white almost.
Exactly. Yeah. And that is one thing that is nice about law, in the sense that you know what to do. And then if you do X, Y, and Z, you will end up where you want to be. And I think a part of, like, I guess the legal part of me, it's like frustrating that writing isn't like this, that you can throw in.
I know everything. That's frustrating for you. You're like, but
I know, it's like you put in all this work.
But the data says.
Yeah.
I always thought you were Claudia, but maybe you're her brother, and I didn't realize it
until now. And so I think kind of, but one thing that the year in Singapore helped with was just helping me decide that I should do an MFA, and that if nothing else, like that would be another path that I could try to get closer to this dream that I had always had. And I had a great time at my MFA. Advertise Brooklyn College. I think above all, it was my fellow writers, the people I met during the program, who became good friends, and who I guess they actually read many versions of the Verifiers. So among other things, gratitude to them. But yeah, it just felt for the first time that it was validating to know that, like, you were working on something, you were writing something, and at the same time, there wasn't that pressure because you were a student. You were studying writing. You didn't have to succeed in it.
Yeah.
And then and then I think halfway through my MFA, the legal side kind of, raised its hand again, and I panicked about, not having any money, and I kind of ran back into the arms of the law. And so I found another job. So now I'm working as an in-house counsel at an investment company. And it's interesting, and I think it gives me a different perspective outside of the publishing world, which I think for my own sanity is actually very helpful.
Is it hard to juggle both? I mean, like, do you feel like you have to turn off your lawyer brain and turn on your writer brain at the end of the day or on the weekends? And you also work long hours and you travel a lot. Like, have you found kind of merging those two identities challenging?
I will admit that it is challenging at points. And I think a part of it is just time, like having the time to write. Yeah. Although I think definitely this is better than when I was an M&A lawyer. Yeah. I think the other thing is, like you said, there is definitely something about attention, because I do feel like when things are busy at work, there's a part of my brain that is just like, oh, this needs to happen and that needs to happen. And, like people like are asking various things of me. And then when I'm trying to think about what I'm writing, then that part of it kind of comes in, because I'm like, oh, right, I need to do this and do that. And a lot of it is also just the timing of, like, for instance, when I check work emails versus when I sit down to write, because if I check my work email right before that, then I'm just thinking about.
And you're thinking about all the things you have to do for work while you're supposed to be thinking about your characters. Yeah.
Exactly. And then I'm also thinking that I'm frustrated at myself for thinking about work while I'm thinking about my.
Like meditating when you've like looked at your email and then you try and meditate. And you can't meditate because you're just like, oh my God, stop thinking about the emails. Meditate. It just doesn't work. I can tell.
Yeah. But I think the bright side, of just having any job, I think, outside of writing and publishing, but then I think also in particular my own job, is that I do get to see a lot of interesting things. We do make investments in a lot of interesting companies that are at various stages of growth, and we kind of keep an eye out for like trends in various sectors like life sciences, tech, consumer, etc. And so through that, you just kind of have experiences and you interact with people that you wouldn't otherwise have, and you also pick up a lot of very bad jargon along the way.
But all I wish I could forget. Like, it was really good fodder for the novel. I mean, I feel like there's so much about tech and investment. I think you really use that stuff that's happening all the time and marinating in your brain and funneled it into a story. Would you say that's true?
I hope that's true. I do personally feel like I find it hard to write about something unless I do feel like I have some kind of grounding in it. Yeah. Like, I think I'm not good at bluffing in that sense. And so I feel like with the verifiers, I was pretty clear on kind of the corporate part, like the M&As and the ways that the companies would operate. And I was pretty clear also on kind of the data part. And then I think, certain elements of like the online dating platforms, that I was not so clear on, I then felt like I had to make it clear that this was a fictionalized version of what these companies actually are in real life. And that actually worked out well, because I think part of what I wanted to explore in this novel wasn't really specific to online dating, but it's more just the idea of how the ways that we use technology and the ways that technology has evolved actually shapes the way that we make choices and that we kind of move through the world. And so online dating was a great way to explore this, because it's very clear that you're like trying to find a match, and these companies help facilitate that by giving you what they think are kind of your 100% match, or 99% match, 98% based on the information that you give them. But it could equally be applied to every area of our lives in terms of
you go to the grocery app. I mean, I thought so much about this the first time that I read the novel. Was we're just walking around. I mean, it's sort of like the Matrix, but like you think you're being presented with all these choices, but the companies are very clearly, whether it's through programming or actual people, choosing what choices you're being presented with based on the choices you've already made in the past and the data that you've given them. And so are we really choosing anything? Like, would I choose that brand of cereal if the app showed me, you know, different brands that they're not showing me, or things that they have, you know, I mean, it's so, and how do those choices then become sort of default? Like, it's easy to just go onto Netflix and be like, you liked this, so you'll like that, as opposed to actually trying to mine through all the information and choices that there are.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about that too is that, and you know, this probably doesn't apply with every tech entrepreneur out there, but a lot of it is well-intentioned in the sense that they actually do think that,
we're trying to make it easier for you. We're trying to make it, you know, make it faster, make it more efficient, get the choices that we actually think you'll like in front of you. But I think you wrote this wonderful essay about compatibility and online dating that, you know, I love. I mean, this is sort of separate from the data and the choices thing, and sort of veering into this question of like, are the people we're compatible with really the people that we're meant to like, or is that going to be the people we really fall in love with? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And I think I came up with the idea for this essay because, and I say this at the start of the essay, which is that, you know, when I was in my late 20s, I did meet this person who, and I really felt like we were just so compatible with a capital C. And we liked all the same things. I mean, she loves cycling the way I love cycling, which is to say cycling around New York City streets at all hours of the day and night, which most
looking
people
for food.
Looking for food. Oh yeah, looking for food.
Looking for great food.
Exactly. She was even more into food than I was. And so I was like, wow, I will never find someone like that again. And then at the same time, we had all these commonalities, like we were both lawyers, we were both from Singapore, we had mutual friends because of those kind of similar backgrounds. And so it just felt like when we broke up, it felt like I would never be able to find someone as compatible as that again. And then, I fast forward some time and I go on OkCupid. I'm like, okay, fine, I should stop moping and I should, get on with my life. And so I found this person's profile online and it was like a 70% match. And, it didn't really seem like we had anything in common.
In the past, would you have thought like, 70% is not enough?
I think it would have depended on like what kind of emotional state I was in. Like if I was in the, oh my God, I'm gonna die single, I need to meet someone. Or if I was, in like let me hold out for something a bit better. So I think at that point, and so thank goodness I did actually, but I think I was just at that stage where I was like, let me just see what's out there. Let me meet people and just, not think about not losing this person, this like wonderfully compatible person. And then she's not my wife. I mean the
all worked out pretty well.
It did. And it's interesting.
But you're not like capital C compatible.
Exactly. Yeah, we're not. We don't have the same interests, and she doesn't like cycling. I used to think she did. Then around like maybe a month in, I was like,
she was like, I really don't.
Exactly.
I never did.
And she actually doesn't like me to cycle too because she thinks it's too dangerous.
It's dangerous.
But that is a compromise we have come to. But I think in other ways, I mean, in just kind of ways where we are both committed to each other and we both want to build a life together and will kind of make that a full priority.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of the foundation for why we work. Plus, and she told after she read the essay, she was like, you didn't say that I'm really funny. So I should say, she's really funny.
She's really funny. And that makes up for compatible.
Exactly. She is possibly the funniest person I know. And so, it just kind of made me think about, when we say that we're compatible with someone, what are we really saying? In a way, it's a conclusion rather than kind of a cause, because if things work out, then you're like, oh, it works out because I'm compatible with this person. But then that in a way makes it kind of meaningless. And so if you try to go in with certain like preconceived notions of what you are looking for, or if you know, in the online dating scenario, if you are able to see what certain traits and characteristics are from the start and you make your decision beforehand, then you kind of don't know what you're missing out on in that
100%.
respect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think Claudia, the heroine of your novel, is at her heart a romantic and therefore doesn't really believe in compatibility?
Yes, so I do think she is a big romantic, and I think that is part of why, to her, kind of the excessive quantification of contemporary society is something that she doesn't really buy into. And in that same respect, the idea of online dating, which feels very kind of step by step, and you know, you like assess this person's traits and you do it by kind of a rational process,
Right.
is something that she also is not particularly enamored with, because
She's
she
kind
would
of
prefer
snobby about it. She's, I mean, for a single person.
exactly, for a perennially single person.
Yes.
So I think for her the ideal would be, you know, like the whole like your eyes meet across, you know, your gazes meet across
Meet
the room,
across a crowded room.
and you just know.
Or you meet at the office.
Or you meet at the office.
So Claudia, like you, Claudia loves to bike around the city. She's a cyclist at, you know, in her bones, and she loves great food. What else does Claudia have in common with you, and what is very different from you?
So I think I kind of gave Claudia my interest. So yeah, the cycling, the food, and also the particular types of food. She is very into pancakes. I am very into pancakes. I think in the course of my MFA, one of my classmates at some point commented, he was like, I've noticed that everything you write has pancakes in it.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And he said it, and this is like, I mean, I love this classmate, but he's someone who always sees symbolism in things. Like all his stories are very
and you were like,
symbolic.
there's no symbolism. They're just really good deeds.
Exactly. And so, but then I was like, oh, from now on, I mean, I will have to put everything, you know, put
You
pancakes
will.
into everything I write. So far that has succeeded.
That will be a hidden, for the true fans will find that.
And I think also her love of literature, I think, is something that I share with her. And I think also just kind of the way she feels about, you know, dressing up and, you know, like having to like
she hates Halloween. You hate Halloween?
I do actually. I am not that big a fan of Halloween. Yeah. But yeah, so I think in terms of lifestyle and all that, we are very similar. I think where we differ is, so I'm also one of 3 siblings, but I am the oldest, and
very different than being the youngest.
Exactly, it's very different. And so I kind of wanted to write a character who was the youngest, because, you know, I was like, oh, you know, to be that happy-go-lucky, you know, person who never has to think about, like, you know,
Claudia would be like, but that's not how it feels like.
It's totally what it's like. My brother, he just kind of like drifts. He has no idea what's going on
through life, huh?
Yeah. And then, you know, everyone else is like having to remind him of like various things. So I thought it'd be fun to write a character like that. And I think also, like, I feel like Claudia actually is able to carry out, because this is fiction, just that dream I always had of, you know, you're kind of going about your own life and something big happens to you that, you know, you never thought that you'd be on this kind of adventure. And I think that's just from the time I was a kid. I think that's part of why I like reading so much, which is that idea that the people in these books just have these adventures and they go out there and they discover things and they're like special in some way. And
well,
so
I know you're a sci-fi and fantasy fan, and that's like what's so fun about so many of those books is like you take an ordinary kid. I mean, it's like Harry Potter or Lion, the Witch, and the Word. Like you open the closet and all of a sudden, you know, it could happen to anybody normal and it could be totally insane.
yes, it's like there's just this whole other world out there, and like you just have to like find it. And so I think I wanted to write her as a character who, when this opportunity comes along, she will like grab it and she'll
Yeah,
run with it.
she
And
is that
so
person. Yeah.
yeah, and so definitely, I mean, the various like some semi-legal things that she does, I would probably not do. Um, but I think her personality is, I mean, she is I think a lot more just kind of carefree and going with the flow than I am.
And I think you've said your mother is not quite
Oh
the
yeah.
overbearing,
Yeah.
very calculated, very critical.
Yeah, and I actually, because my mother was very excited that like I had a book published. I mean, I was having a book published, and she knows how much I have worked for it and how much it's meant to me, and just all the setbacks along the way. And so she was very happy. And so when she saw the arc, actually, she was like, "Oh, I want 2 copies," and I had to explain that it wasn't actually the book. But then also when I brought it back to Singapore, like when I handed it over to her, I was like, the mother is not
It's
based on
not you.
Yeah, like it's nothing like you. Yeah, my mother is really great. She's just really supportive, and she loves us all very, very much. And I really do think she's the best mother that someone could have. At the same time, in writing the verifiers, I really wanted to create like a complicated mother character.
Yeah.
And
She's
I
a mom
felt
who didn't want to be a mom.
exactly, yeah. And I felt like, and I didn't, because the story is about Claudia, like I didn't want that to be kind of the focus point of the story, but I did just want to have that character in there, and then for her dynamics with her children to play out, given this kind of fundamental fact that she feels like the life that she had was not the life that she wanted. And so much of it was because of effectively how she had to take care of her children
Right.
single-handedly.
Right, right. Can you talk a little bit about what it meant to you, or what you wanted to explore when you created this dynamic between Claudia and her siblings, that she was born in the United States, or she grew up in the United States, and they didn't for the beginning of their lives?
Yeah. So I myself am I guess you would call it a first generation immigrant, in that I was born and grew up in Singapore, and then I made the decision to come over to the US. Um, and I did want to have my character be some kind of an immigrant, because I think that gives you a particular lens in terms of how you view your place in society
Mhm.
and how you move through it. But I didn't want my protagonist to be first generation, because then I felt like too much of the novel would have to go into exploring this idea of why did she move? Why did she choose
Right.
to move, or why did she have to move? And how did that affect kind of her knowledge of her other country with like
Right.
America? So I knew that I wanted Claudia to be second generation, but at the same time, I did want to explore some of that and the differences between someone like her who is fully American. Even if, I mean, I make a few jokes about how, like out in the world, when people interact with her, they don't always perceive her
Right, of
as fully
course.
American. And with her siblings who actually have this other shared history that she doesn't have, and
Right.
that in some ways penalizes them for it, in terms of just how close they are with their mother. Also, this kind of lingering feeling on their part that their mother loves them less because
Right.
they were the ones who were brought up, who were not brought up by her. Um, but then how they interact with Claudia. And one thing that I do really enjoy is looking at sibling relationships, because I feel
Mhm.
like there's so much there. There's all that resentment, and there's all the jealousy, and there's also just always this idea of like, who does your parent love most? Like that kind of very loaded question.
Uh-huh.
And I felt like this was a very interesting situation to explore this, because you kind of know from the start that Claudia is different from her siblings.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, like I wanted to try to offset that by having her brother be a lot more conventionally successful, and
Right.
her sister being a lot more conventionally attractive.
Beautiful. Right.
And so, yeah. And so does all of that play out in terms of, at the end of the day, how they feel about each other and how they feel about their mother and what they think their mother thinks of them, and just that dynamic of how they all kind of interact.
I love how Claudia uses people's preconceived notions of who she is or what she's like to her advantage. So she can be like, oh, nobody's going to notice me because I'm sort of the petite Asian woman, or I'm on the bike, nobody notices me. I'm not walking around, or I'm not as gorgeous as my sister, so nobody stops and notices me. And then she can use that to her advantage as a detective.
Yeah, and that was something that I did want to highlight, because I do think, there is that kind of Asian stereotype. And I think she does kind of mention it a couple of points too, that, as Asians, you're just quiet. And especially as Asian women, you're quiet, you're invisible. People never assume that you'll do anything wrong or bad or, act out in any way, because that's not who you are. And so I just thought that it would be funny if, that was parlayed into part of what made her a good detective, because no one notices her. And so no one kind of distrusts her, because they don't think that she's going to do anything sketchy. And so she's able to use that to actually kind of help with her investigations in small, but, ultimately, I think sometimes important ways.
I think it's also amazing that, she has this love of Jane Austen, this sort of, having studied the marriage proposal in Jane Austen's book, she's a romantic. And she also knows a lot about detective novels. And she sort of brings both to bear on the job, but in a very sort of innocent kind of a way. So she has all that information, and it's sort of helping her, but also she's approaching it not in a I'm going to be a detective and I'm going to solve this case kind of way. It's just her kind of plucky personality.
Yeah, and I think I think I made her a mystery fan, because in a way I wanted to use her love of this fictional detective series in the novel, the Inspector Yuan mysteries, to poke fun a bit at the tropes of the murder mystery, because there are so many tropes, and they are easy to make fun of. The way the clues are laid out, the red herrings, how the detective always has to reenact every single potential suspect, what they could have done before eliminating them all, and then you close in on the one. And so I think having her be a mystery fan and thus referencing these fictional detectives was a way for me to do that. And then also, every now and then for the Inspector Yuan novels, to give her a clue as to what happened, although I would say probably often as not, it was not actually helpful, because she was basing kind of her deductions on, some Chinese sword fighting medieval
wasn't really
series. And then I think the Jane Austen thing, it's interesting, because I do think that as I grow older, I appreciate Jane Austen more and more. And I think it's because so much of what she says is really so true, and it is so adept at capturing how we feel, as humans, regardless of just what era we're born in or what our circumstances are. And it was almost as I was writing this that I came to realize that actually, various aspects of what I was writing did have parallels with Pride and Prejudice.
In some ways, it's a very modern novel because of all the technology. And then in some ways, there's a lot of classic, themes you're exploring.
Yeah. And I think part of why I did want to kind of have the literary references be either fictional in that I made them up, or kind of more classic like Jane Austen or Agatha Christie, was also because I didn't like the idea of dating the book too much, pun unintended, because it just felt like if she had referenced a really contemporary author, the reader would just immediately know that this took place, say 2005 to 2000.
Right. There's something great about the fact that it exists out of time. It's not, you're in New York City, you feel very much like you're in a contemporary New York City, but it also isn't distracted by, say, Trump's presidency or COVID, or even a certain kind of technology we have on our phones, or, I think that those are really complicated things that I think can easily date a book.
Yeah. And so I kind of tried my best, I think, with just with having to make up a whole bunch of pop culture references, which actually worked out because I am not at
You
all
made
pop
up a
culture
whole
savvy. So
band.
I
You
did make
made
up
up
a
a band. It's
band.
amazing. And if people go check out Jane's amazing playlist, you'll see who she based some of that. There's a lot of great music in the book. There's a lot of great food. And some of the music and the band that she created is based on some real music that you love. You got to put a
Yeah,
lot of fun stuff in there, I feel like.
I did. And it's funny because I think, I mean, one actually really like unexpected but amazing thing about having this book be published is that I've actually reconnected with various friends, like, you know, from years past. And a number of them were friends whom I had made and hung out with when we were all in our mid-20s in New York, you know, online dating, wondering if we would ever meet anyone, going
Love
on
that.
long bike rides, going to Smorgasburg. And so, you know, I was like, I hope this makes you feel nostalgic for that completely unmoored time in our lives.
I'm mindful of the time and that we're getting close to time to open it up to audience questions. Are there things that really surprised you about the process of being a published author or of going through the publication experience that you sort of, when you were in your MFA days or even in your youth, and you imagine like, I'm going to be a published writer and it's going to be like this? Like, what did it turn out to not be like?
Oh, okay. Um, so I'll say that I totally didn't think at all about or, you know, really consider all the work that actually goes into promoting the book
Yeah.
and making sure that it gets out into the world and just having like making sure that people pay attention to it. And, you know, I really have to thank you. And I think the whole Vintage Anchor team for just kind of, you know, plugging along and just kind of trying to like get it out there through as many channels as possible. But that was something that I totally, you know, I don't think it even crossed my mind that, oh, I would have to do this, you know, events like this,
Right.
like a few times, let alone, you know, I think for a time it was about 3 or 4 times a week kind
Yeah.
of thing. Um, and so that I think has been a surprise. Then I think the other thing is just how long it takes to publish a book.
Yes. Well, certainly compared to your job, right? Which is like
Yes.
very,
Yes, everything is, we need this done in 2 days. And then, yeah, so it's kind of nice. I mean, in a way that publishing, you know, we just gonna take our time. But then
yeah.
on the other hand, it's also a bit anxiety inducing. Yeah.
Yes, it can be such a long process that you're like, I just need it to like happen and be over
Yeah.
now. So I can like, I know that New York Times book review is coming. Just let it like come and happen so it can be over. And it was amazing. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on next?
Yeah, so and you know, I'm actually like really thrilled that people have started asking, you know, if there will be a sequel and things like that. And I would love to write a sequel to the Verifiers. I feel like you know, upon various people's advice, I did actually make the ending more conclusive than I think it had been when we started out.
Yes.
Which was just total cliffhanger. But then here's kind of,
I was fine with the total cliffhanger, but your editor very smartly was like, let's wrap it up just a little bit more.
But at the same time, it does kind of leave it open to like the bigger questions of, you know, what's going to happen, not to spoil the book, I guess. So bigger questions are left unanswered, and it's set up such that the agency can continue and there are more things for them to look into. So I mean, I would love to write more of these books featuring Veracity and Claudia and kind of investigating more the dynamics between her and various other characters, and also how her family develops. I have some ideas about, you know, how just the ways that kind of her siblings' relationships within the family and with their mother will kind of come a bit to a head.
Yeah.
And I think in a sequel, I would also be interested in, I feel like this first book played a lot with like the tropes of the murder mystery, and it was structured like a murder mystery, but you know, it also like with all the tech and the other questions in the family story wasn't really like a standard murder mystery. And I would love to do that, but more along the lines of like a spy or an espionage.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a ton of fun to be had with that, obviously, with like James Bond and
Can we
John le
please? I mean, we need
everything.
Claudia to get some love in her life. That is what I am here for, is for Claudia to go on some dates, maybe with a certain coworker.
Individual.
Well,
Given that she only has like 2.
well, that's true. I mean, was that fun? I for those people who haven't read it, I will say, Claudia has an amazing sort of romantic tension with one of her coworkers, and it felt so fun to read. I wondered if it was fun to write.
It was actually fun to write, and I will confess that when I started the book, like the very first beginning of it, didn't have the 2 of them in mind as a couple.
Made for each other.
And then everyone was like, you should like have them get together. And
what was you're too young for this, but was it Moonlighting? Somebody in the chat will help me out here. With Bruce Willis and whatever her name was, and he was a detective. Anyway, they're like opposites attract, very different personalities.
They are very different. And actually someone emailed me a few days ago and they were like I love reading your book, and then they were like, the ending was amazing, and then I went back and reread all the scenes with the 2 of them.
I love that.
I know. I was like, that's exactly what I did too. So yeah. So that has definitely gotten some traction, I think.
The other amazing thing, I think that Moonlighting, yes, thank you. The other thing I think that's amazing is that you just don't see that many queer characters for whom their queerness is not the story, right? Mm-hmm. This is a character who happens to be queer. Obviously, that's a big part of her identity, but that's just one piece of who she is, and that's not what the story itself is about.
Yeah.
And I think that's really exciting, because I think that when we get to a place where we start having books where more people's identities and lives are represented just as part of the fabric of their character rather than the point of the story, then people are going to start to see the commonality that everybody shares in their humanity. Yeah. That just got very intense very quickly.
Well, it's been progressing through the session, I guess. Yeah. But that was actually something that was really important to me. I think when I first came up with this idea and I started writing the book, I think I did definitely want to have a female protagonist who liked girls and was comfortable with that fact, and would kind of carry out her life in that fashion, even if she hasn't told her mother about it, because
small detail, just a little.
Yeah, because I mean, for me growing up, I never read those kinds of books, and not even the books where the characters were having adventures and they were gay. It was just books without gay characters at all, and so I felt like I always had to take that extra step in trying to imagine myself in those shoes.
Yeah.
And just I couldn't fully identify with what they were going through and what was happening to them. And so I just felt like when it came time for me to write my novel, I did really want to create that character who I think it's not really out there, and just have people see this character who goes out there, has adventures, falls in love, and it's just
all the mystery.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think, Abby, should we open it up to questions? Yeah.
Yes, and we do have one right here in the Q&A that's a little bit more about the behind the scenes of the process, which you've sort of touched on earlier. How long did you and Julie work on getting the manuscript ready to submit? And then how long did it take to find a publisher?
Can you cast your memory back that far? I feel like that was so long ago.
I know, that was
whole pre-pandemic.
Yeah, so yeah, it was pre-pandemic.
I'm like, wasn't it? Time has no meaning anymore is the problem.
So I think I remember very clearly signing with you because my mind, that emoji, the head exploding emoji, that was like me for like that whole period of time. But I think that was in June 2019.
Yes, I remember because I
Yeah.
remember working on it over the summer.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then I think we went out in September
Yeah, I
2019.
mean, I don't think we did that. I didn't put you through that many rounds. I think that we did maybe two or
Yeah.
three. And then we had the unusual experience of finding an editor who was really passionate about the book, who gave us some editorial feedback before buying the book. And that took another, how many months?
It took like several months.
Yeah.
Because we were squarely in the pandemic, I think, when
By the time
sold the
we,
book.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that because I wasn't living in the city. Yeah. So that
Yeah.
probably was in the spring.
Or
So almost a
summer.
year from probably when we started to when we
Yeah.
sold it. And then it took another year and a half to come out.
Yes. Like
And
I
that
said,
is
long
how
publishing
long
process.
publishing process takes. Yeah.
Journey. Oh, this is fun. Can you tell us about the day that Julie called you with the news that you had a publisher?
Oh my gosh, yes. I remember that clearly too, because I was actually at Mohonk, I think. And I think I was like getting ready to drive back. And then you emailed me. You're like, can we talk? I have some news. And in my mind, because I was in a very paranoid state, so I was like, oh my God, she's calling to tell me that, like kind of the editor we submitted to had rejected it or something. And I said to my wife, I was like, okay, I need to have this call right now because otherwise I cannot drive us back for like 2 hours. So I need to know, otherwise the whole time that I'm driving, that's all I can think of. And so, I called you and you were like, we have an offer. And then, it was like amazing also because like I had been so like preemptively prepared for like bad news.
That's part of my job. Making
Oh, I bet. So you two did touch on Jane Austen a bit during your conversation. And Jane, you had that essay in Lit Hub where you talked about your experience of rereading Pride and Prejudice and how your perspective on it kind of shifted over the years as you went through like different changes in your life. And I really liked that idea of returning to a book. And so I was wondering if there were other books that you've had that experience with. And Julie, I feel like you could answer this question too, actually.
I'll think. You go first.
I think for me, I mean, so Pride and Prejudice is one that I do remember quite clearly. But I think otherwise, a number of children's books, I think, that I read when I was a kid, like Little House on the Prairie, Anne of Green Gables, Little Women, Narnia, and I think more other fantasy stories. It's Winnie the Pooh, actually. It's been really interesting kind of coming back to all of them now, like not reading them as a 12-year-old or 13-year-old, but I think in my 20s or in my 30s, and just kind of seeing layers to those books that I hadn't been able to pick up on the first time. Like I actually found Winnie the Pooh a lot funnier as an adult than I did as a child. Like as a child, it was very boring. But as an adult, I was like, oh, this is so funny.
You're like, oh, it's deep.
Yeah, it is deep.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not a big rereader, interestingly. I don't know if it's because I have so much reading on my plate, for work that I don't have as much time to like go back to my shelves. I'm obsessive about keeping books, and I have books from my childhood and I have books from my 20s, my college years and everything. So I see them all the time. But I would really be interested. I do think I was sort of like, when I was a teenager, I went through this phase where I just read whatever my father was reading. Oh. And now I'm like, I think I missed a lot that was going on. And it was like, all the Philip Roth novels that I read when I was like 16. Uptake especially, because I feel like there's so much that's not said in Uptake. And I probably didn't understand anything. Robertson Davies is this wonderful Canadian author that I think sort of doesn't get enough credit. Although I say that, and then like I remember I lived in London for a year, and I was there was one book, I won't say it because I feel like it's I loved it so much. And then I did go back and reread it like 10 years ago. And I was like, oh, no, that's not good. No.
Interesting.
So I'm almost sort of sometimes afraid to read it.
Mm-hmm.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Like when you read something and you love it so much the first time, and then you go back and it's just not as good as you remember.
I will say that I thought I was going to get, and I know she's a very complicated person. I wouldn't have to buy the books because I own them all. But I really always dreamed I would read the Harry Potter novels to my child, and I would get to experience all of them. It could change, but my 8-year-old has literally no interest whatsoever. Like none. He does not like dramatic tension. Doesn't really like fiction. Loves nonfiction. And every time I try and talk about them, he's like, Harry's parents died. And like a child dies. Like, why would I want to read that book? And I'm like, it's fine. It's really reach myself one day.
Oh my god.
Has he seen the movies?
Oh no.
Yeah.
I tried to read them, and then like I was like, well, maybe like what about like the mixed up files of the ones that took place in the museum of Frankel.
Basil E.
I can never say it. Beeswater.
Basil.
Yeah, I started with that. And he was like, I read like 20 pages and he was sort of quiet. And I was like, how was it? And he was like, it's fine. And I was like, it's not good. And he's like, really? And I was like, okay, never mind on that one. So, yeah.
Maybe
apparently we don't have the same taste in books.
He might discover fiction a bit later. Maybe.
I'm hoping so. Jane.
Yeah.
Because kind of what I do for a living. So.
Jane, do you feel like any of those books from your childhood had like an unexpected influence on the verifiers?
Oh, from my childhood, I feel like not maybe. I think if anything, it might actually be the ones that are not really that related in that. So I'm actually a big fantasy and science fiction geek. And so that was what I read, like epic fantasy. Like I loved epic fantasy. And so I think, as we had spoken during the chat, I think I really like that idea of like, this ordinary protagonist who kind of stumbles into a big adventure. I think maybe that was part of what I took away from with the verifiers, but then that's probably something I would put into any book, I think.
I also think there's so many of those great, like all those sci-fi and fantasy novels that I read when I was young were the one place where the like geeky kid, like where I felt very much like it could be me. Because like I'm really nerdy and like not so socially like successful, but like it doesn't seem like it's the popular kid who gets chosen for these crazy adventures. So
exactly. Yeah. It's like we have a comparative advantage.
Yes.
Because, Yeah. Or like The Never Ending Story. Actually, that was the book I think I reread.
Yeah. That's a good one. Well, we've been talking about books basically the whole time, but to round us out, are there any books, maybe like forthcoming ones that you're really excited about that you'd like to tell us about? And we can pop those links in the chat.
Sure. So I will say that actually there's a book that actually came out the same day as mine, I think, called The Paradox Hotel by this guy called Rob Hart. And it sounds really cool about this hotel where like guests can travel back into the past, and then there's someone who's murdered, and the protagonist is like I think a police officer or something, or like a security guy. She has to like figure out what's going on. The funny thing is, I think, and this was obviously years ago, pre-pandemic, but I think Rob Hart and I were actually at the same Krav Maga studio as well.
Oh wow!
Because I remember he has a very distinctive mustache, but also I think they actually in our Krav Maga newsletter there was like, we have an author who's does Krav Maga, and it was him. So
yeah, they have two authors who do Krav Maga.
So that was funny. And then another book that I think just came out is by Max Gladstone, and it's called Last Exit. And it's kind of described as like American Gods meets American road trip novel. And he's an author. And again, like there's like I think he also went to Yale, and we actually had the same writing professor, but at different times. And so it was my writing professor who mentioned him to me. But he writes fantasy, but it's really kind of like smart and thoughtful conceptual fantasy. And his breakout series was it was actually, I mean, to me as a lawyer, really cool, because it was, what if like law was actually magic? So like when you wrote contracts, they actually had like effects in the physical world. And so
Wow,
you could
that's
literally
cool.
bind yourself by like writing in certain clauses. And it kind of played on the ideas of, obviously very, very nerdy to, but given that I was a lawyer, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, constitutional law. And it's
The lawyer in
magic.
you.
Exactly. And then I think one that's coming out that I'm really excited about is Emily St. John Mandel's Sea of Tranquility. I mean,
So good.
yeah.
It's so good.
That just
Yeah.
sounds so amazing. And she's such a nice person. I mean, she learned my book and like she didn't even know me, but she's
It's a
really,
great
really
one.
cool person.
Yeah. Cool.
What about you, Julie?
Well, can I plug my own books? Is that fair?
Yeah.
I will say I read the Emily St. John Mandel. It's coming out soon. It's amazing. I read the new Jenny Egan, also bananas amazing. And Emma Straub, some time travel in there, also fantastic.
Cool.
Of my own authors, I will say I have 2 books coming out at the end of March that I'm really excited about. One is Maude Newton's Ancestor Trouble, which is an unusual book for me because it's nonfiction, but it reads like fiction, which is my favorite kind of nonfiction. And it's sort of part memoir, part sort of social exploration into America's obsession with our ancestors and what they say, what we think they say about who we are and how our identities are not based on them. And then Megan Mayhew Bergman has an amazing new short story collection. Jennifer Close has a new novel called Marrying the Ketchups for those of us who have done our time as waitresses. You will find a lot that's familiar there. That's in April. And Selma Blair's Mean Baby is the first celebrity memoir I've ever worked on. She is just an extraordinary human, and it's really funny and it's really wonderfully done. Yeah, some of the ones I'm excited about.
Awesome. Yeah, and we've got those links coming here in the chat. Just to give Victoria one more second to get those links in, maybe we can squeeze this in before we finish. If you read fantasy, why did you write a mystery?
Oh, good.
That is a good question. So I will actually say that when I started out with the Verifiers, I didn't intend for it to become the kind of murder mystery that it turned out to be. I think I came up with the idea for the online dating detective agency. But that was kind of where I was stuck at. Like I had this premise that I thought sounded really fun and that I could, play around with, but I didn't actually have anything for them to investigate. And so I was just like kind of trying to like come up with things that they could investigate. And it was just hard to find anything that felt like, it had enough narrative momentum and that it was significant enough. And so finally I was like, well, what if I kill someone? Then, they can go run off and like start investigating. And then that would just play out the way that a murder mystery would play out, because there's kind of a clear structure with respect to the murder mystery. I would love to write a fantasy someday. I will say I do have an idea for a fantasy book.
It's a good one.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll just have to wait then.
Yes. To wait.
Oh, I'm so excited now. Well, thank you both, Julie and Jane. This has been I was so excited for this event. I was so happy I got to work it. It was such a pleasure to talk to both of you. Everyone, don't forget to purchase the Verifiers. Of course, there are the links in the chat, and you're also welcome to visit us in store. And as a reminder, we do have signed book plates from Jane as a special bonus. You can't get those from certain other places, so keep that in mind. But yeah, that's about it for me. Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Abby. This was so lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you for having